At this point, Japan is ruled by an emperor and a central government based in the capital, and the country is organized under something called the Ritsuryo system, which is basically a legal and administrative structure borrowed heavily from Chinese models. On paper, the emperor controls everything: land, taxes, the military. But here's the thing about controlling a country from one central capital. The further you get from that capital, the weaker your actual control becomes. And Japan's countryside, especially out in the provinces, was a lot of territory to control from far away. So local landowners and provincial families start doing something practical. They start hiring their own private warriors to protect their land, their rice fields, their interests, because the central government's army just isn't reliable enough or close enough to help when trouble shows up. These early warriors were called bushi, which just means warrior or military man. And at this stage, they're not romantic figures at all. They're essentially private security, hired muscle for wealthy landowners. You might be picturing something dramatic here, but honestly, it's closer to medieval property management with swords. Now here's where it gets interesting. Over the next few centuries, something starts to shift. The central government keeps getting weaker, regional clans keep getting stronger, and these provincial warrior families start realizing something important. If the emperor's government can't actually enforce order out here, then whoever controls the local warriors basically controls the region. Power is quietly moving, not through a single dramatic event, but slowly, generation by generation, from the capital out into the provinces. By the 12th century, this slow shift explodes into direct conflict. Two of the most powerful warrior clans in Japan, the Taira and the Minamoto, end up in a massive power struggle for control, not just of land, but of the entire direction of the country. This conflict is known as the Genpei War, and it runs from 1180 to 1185. 5 years of warfare between two of the most powerful families in Japan. And it ends in one of the most decisive naval battles in Japanese history, the Battle of Dan no Ura in 1185. The Minamoto clan crushes the Taira, essentially wiping out their leadership in a single devastating battle at sea. And with that victory, the head of the Minamoto clan, a man named Minamoto no Yoritomo, becomes the most powerful figure in Japan. But here's the part that I think is genuinely wild. Yoritomo doesn't try to become emperor. He doesn't overthrow the imperial family at all. Instead, in 1192, he does something almost sneakier. He gets the emperor to grant him the title of shogun, which basically means supreme military commander. On the surface, the emperor is still technically in charge. He's still treated as divine, still the official head of Japan, but the actual power, the real day-to-day control over land, laws, and military force, now belongs to Yoritomo and his warrior government, based not in the imperial capital, but in a city called Kamakura. Think about how clever that actually is. You don't need to remove the person at the top if you just take control of everything underneath them. This moment, 1192, Yoritomo becoming shogun, is usually marked as the true beginning of what's called the shogunate system, and with it, the beginning of the samurai era as most people think of it. From here forward, real political power in Japan belongs to warrior families, not the imperial court. And this system, this warrior-led government, is going to run Japan in one form or another for nearly 700 years. 700 years. That's longer than the entire history of the United States, several times over. Now, once warriors are officially the ruling class, something else starts happening. A code of conduct starts forming around what it means to be a proper samurai. This later gets known as Bushido, the way of the warrior. Loyalty to your lord, discipline, honor in battle, a willingness to face death without hesitation. And look, some of this ideal was genuinely lived up to, but a lot of it also gets romanticized and formalized much later than people assume. Many of the most famous samurai codes of honor were actually written down centuries after this founding period, during a much more peaceful era, almost like the warriors of the past were being turned into legends by the warriors of the present. Which is kind of a funny thing to sit with. A lot of what you picture when you hear the word samurai, the strict honor code, the dramatic duels, the poetic devotion to death, that image was partly built by later generations looking backward, shaping the story of their ancestors into something more legendary than the messy, practical, political reality actually was. And the messy, practical, political reality is honestly the more interesting story anyway. This wasn't some ancient warrior class that appeared fully formed with swords raised and codes of honor already written. It was landowners hiring guards. It was regional families slowly building power while a distant emperor's authority quietly eroded. It was two clans fighting a 5-year war that ended in a single naval battle. It was one man being clever enough to realize he didn't need a crown. He just needed control. You know what's kind of remarkable about this whole story? It's not really about warriors at all, not at its core. It's about what happens when power in a system slowly drains away from the center and pools somewhere else instead. That pattern, central authority weakening, regional power growing, and eventually, a shift so complete that the people actually holding power aren't the ones with the official titles anymore. That's not just a Japanese story. You can find versions of that same pattern all over history, in a dozen different civilizations, a dozen different centuries. The samurai era didn't begin with a single battle or a single hero. It began with hundreds of small, practical decisions made by people just trying to protect what they had. And it took hundreds of years for those small decisions to add up into one of the most iconic warrior traditions in world history. So the next time you see a samurai in a movie, standing there with a sword, calm, honorable, almost mythical, it's worth remembering that the whole thing actually started with something much smaller. Some hired guards, some nervous landowners, and a very, very long, very human story about power quietly slipping through the emperor's fingers, one province at a time. If stories like this, the real history behind the legends you grew up with, are the kind of thing that pulls you in, there's a lot more of it here.